The gunshot cracked before she even saw him. Amanda stumbled backward into a stranger's chest, hard, warm, smelling of rain and gunpowder. Golden eyes met hers in the chaos. In that single heartbeat, something ancient and reckless woke inside Kang Min-ho. He would burn the world down before he let her go. Welcome to Korean romance tales where love, passion, and emotional stories come to life. If you enjoy romantic stories with unforgettable twists, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Amanda had learned to smile through humiliation. At 34, she'd perfected it, the tight, polite curve of her lips whenever her cousins cornered her at family dinners with their favorite refrain. Still no husband unnigh. At this age, tonight's engagement party for her cousin Yuri was no different. The ballroom glittered with orchids and old money, and Amanda stood at the edges in her modest navy dress, feeling every year of her age like a weight around her throat. Maybe she likes being alone, her cousin Hana had whispered to another relative, just loud enough to carry. Some women just aren't meant for love. Amanda gripped her champagne glass and said nothing. She was used to being invisible in rooms full of people who mattered. She didn't notice the black sedans pulling up outside, tinted windows catching the streetlights like watching eyes. The first scream came from the entrance. Then another. Amanda turned just as 3 men in dark suits pushed through the ballroom doors, weapons drawn, voices sharp with command. Guests scattered, glass shattering, chairs overturning. Amanda froze, her body locked in place by pure terror, as one of the armed men swung his gun toward the crowd toward her. That was when he appeared. A tall man in a charcoal suit moved through the chaos like he owned it, like bullets bent around him out of respect. He didn't run from the gunfire. He walked into it, calm and lethal, and with one motion disarmed the nearest attacker and put him on the ground. Amanda watched, breathless, as the other intruders scrambled back, suddenly recognizing him. "Boss," one of them stammered before Min-ho's men closed in and dragged them out. Amanda's knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the floor. "Safe," the man said, his voice low, controlled, undone at the edges. "I've got you." She looked up into his face and something inside her chest cracked open. He was devastatingly handsome, sharp-jawed, dark hair falling over his forehead, eyes that held both violence and tenderness in the same breath. He didn't look away from her, not even as his men cleared the room behind him. Who are you?" she whispered. "Kang Min-ho." He said it like a warning and an introduction all at once. "You're not hurt?" "I don't think so." Her voice shook. "Why did they?" "That doesn't matter right now." His hand lingered at her waist a beat longer than necessary before he released her, and Amanda felt the loss of it like cold air. "Someone will take you home." "Can manage on my own," she said, straightening her spine, gathering the last scraps of her dignity. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, maybe respect. "I don't think you can, not tonight." The next morning, Amanda woke to find a black car waiting outside her apartment building, its driver holding the door with practiced patience. She hadn't asked for an escort. She hadn't asked for anything. But when she peered through her curtains, she saw the same car that had driven her home the night before, and understood, with a chill she couldn't quite name, that Kang Min-ho did not do things by half measures. She ignored the car and took the subway to work instead, telling herself it meant nothing. It wasn't until that evening, walking home from the flower shop where she worked arranging bouquets for other people's love stories, that she saw him standing across the street. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't pretending to be there by coincidence. He was simply waiting, hands in his coat pockets, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. "Following me," she said when she crossed to him, more startled than angry. "Making sure you're safe," he corrected. "There's a difference." "I don't need protection from a stranger," Amanda said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You needed it last night." His gaze moved over her face like he was memorizing it. "The men who attacked the party were sent by a rival syndicate. They were aiming for me. You were simply standing too close." Guilt flickered across his features, quick, unguarded, gone almost before she could name it. "So this is what penance?" she asked. "You feel responsible, so you're stalking me." "I feel," he paused as if the words surprised even him, "responsible for making sure nothing like that ever touches you again." Intensity in his voice unsettled her more than any gunfire had. Over the following days, small things began to appear. A bouquet of peonies, her favorite, though she told no one, left at the shop's counter. A car that idled a respectful distance from her building each evening, never approaching, simply present. Once, when a drunk customer grew aggressive with her at the shop, 2 of Min-ho's men appeared within minutes, quiet and imposing, and the man fled without a word. Amanda told herself she resented the intrusion. She told herself and didn't quite believe it. "You have a stalker," her co-worker Jae-yoon teased one afternoon, watching the black car through the shop window. "A rich one by the looks of him." "He's not my anything," Amanda muttered, arranging roses with more force than necessary. But that night she found herself looking for the car before she even reached the corner. A week later, Min-ho appeared at the shop in person, filling the small doorway with his broad shoulders and unreadable expression. He didn't buy flowers. He simply stood there watching her work until she finally set down her shears. "Is there a reason you're here, Mr. Kang?" "I wanted to see you," he said simply, without artifice, and something about his bluntness disarmed her more than any smooth line could have. "You could have called. I don't have your number." Then how? She stopped herself, realizing the absurdity. Of course a man with private armies and black sedans could find her address, her schedule, her favorite flowers. Getting her phone number would be trivial. "You didn't ask for it because you wanted to come here yourself." His silence was answer enough. That evening he asked her to dinner, not command, not assumption, an actual hesitant question that seemed foreign in his mouth. Amanda surprised herself by saying yes. The restaurant he took her to was quiet, private, a corner booth shielded from other diners. He ordered for both of them in fluent, effortless Korean, then seemed to catch himself and asked if that had been presumptuous. "A little," Amanda admitted, smiling despite herself. "But the food looks good, so I'll allow it." Something in his shoulders relaxed, as if her smile had loosened a knot he'd been carrying since the shooting. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "Not what people say about you. What's true?" No one had asked her that in longer than she could remember. She told him about the flower shop, about her mother who'd passed years ago, about the family who measured her worth by a ring she didn't have. She hadn't meant to share so much, but his attention was unlike anything she'd experienced, total, unhurried, as if nothing in the world mattered more than her words. "Your family sounds cruel," he said quietly. "Not cruel, just traditional. A woman my age should be married, should have children, should have something to show for her life." "You have a life," Min-ho said, his voice rough with something like anger on her behalf. "You have a business you built, a heart big enough to arrange flowers for strangers' weddings even when it must ache to do so. That is not nothing." Amanda's eyes strung, unexpectedly. No one had ever framed her life that way before. By the end of the week, they had fallen into an unspoken rhythm. Dinners after her shop closed, quiet walks through the city where his hand hovered near the small of her back without ever quite touching, phone calls that stretched past midnight for no reason, except neither wanted to hang up first. Amanda's cousins would have called it scandalous, moving too fast, foolish for a woman her age to fall for a dangerous stranger. She didn't care. For the first time in years she felt seen, not despite her age, not despite the family narrative that she was somehow incomplete, but entirely, fiercely herself. Still, a warning simmered beneath the warmth. Min-ho's world was one of danger, and danger did not disappear simply because two people wanted to pretend otherwise. The truth surfaced at a charity gala Min-ho invited her to, her first appearance at his side in public. Whispers followed them instantly. Who is she? Why is the Kang heir bringing a florist? Is that even a designer dress? Amanda's spine stiffened under the scrutiny, old wounds reopening beneath silk and pearls. Then a man approached, smooth and confident, clearly unaware or uncaring of whose company she kept. "You're stunning," he said, leaning close. "Has anyone told you that tonight?" Before Amanda could respond, Min-ho was there, a hand settling possessively at her waist, his voice edged with quiet steel. "She has, by someone whose opinion actually matters to her." Stranger blanched and retreated. Amanda stared up at Min-ho, breathless at the raw jealousy simmering beneath his composed exterior. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I did," he said, jaw tight. "Watching another man look at you like that, it does something to me I don't have a name for." Later that night, on the balcony overlooking the city lights, Amanda turned to him, emboldened by wine and the ache that had been building in her chest for weeks. "What are we doing, Min-ho?" He studied her for a long moment, the wind stirring his dark hair. "I don't know how to be gentle with this," he admitted. "In my world I take what I want and I protect it with everything I have. But you," his hand rose to cradle her jaw, thumb tracing her cheekbone with a tenderness that contradicted every violent thing she'd witnessed him do. "You make me want to be careful, soft, something I haven't been in a very long time." Amanda's breath caught. "That sounds like a confession." "It is." His forehead dropped to rest against hers, the space between them shrinking to nothing. "I am absolutely, irrevocably yours, Amanda. I have been since the moment you fell into my arms." She should have pulled away. Every instinct honed by years of disappointment told her to protect herself, to not believe that a man like him, powerful, feared, capable of violence she'd witnessed firsthand, could want someone as ordinary as her. But his eyes held no deception, only a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own. "Scared," she admitted against his lips, barely a breath of space between them. "So am I," he murmured. "But I would rather be terrified with you than safe without you." When he finally kissed her, it was not the demanding, possessive claim she might have expected from a man of his reputation. It was slow, reverent, his hands trembling slightly as they framed her face, as if she were something infinitely precious he feared breaking. The city lights blurred around them. Nothing existed except the space between their bodies, shrinking to nothing. That night in the quiet privacy of his penthouse, hesitation gave way to something neither of them could name, only feel. Amanda's heart pounded against her ribs as Min-ho looked at her like she was the only steady thing in a world built on chaos and violence. His hands were gentle, reverent, learning the shape of her as if committing her to memory. "Tell me to stop," he whispered against her temple, giving her every chance to change her mind. "Tell me and I will." "Don't stop," she breathed, and the words unraveled the last of his restraint. What followed was not shown, only felt. The fade of city light to darkness, the soft murmur of names spoken like prayers, two people finding something neither had known they were searching for. When morning came, Amanda woke wrapped in unfamiliar sheets, Min-ho's arm heavy and warm across her waist, and for one perfect moment she allowed herself to believe in something impossible. Then the fear crept in. He would wake and regret this, she told herself. A man like him, young, powerful, capable of having anyone, would see clearly in daylight what he'd overlooked in the dark. That she was too old, too plain, too ordinary for someone of his stature. The old wounds her family had carved into her resurfaced with vicious clarity. Before he stirred, Amanda slipped from the bed, dressed in silence, and left before the sun fully rose, her heart splitting with every step toward the door. She didn't see him wake minutes later, reaching for her out of instinct, finding only cold sheets where she'd been. She didn't see the raw panic that crossed his face, or hear him say her name to an empty room like it was the only word that mattered. Min-ho's hands shook as he dialed her number for the fourth time, each call going straight to silence. He was on his feet before he'd even registered, standing, dragging a shirt over his head, fear coursing through him with a violence he hadn't felt since childhood. This was not the composed, controlled boss his empire feared. This was a man unraveling. "Find her," he barked at his second-in-command, Tae-yoon, the moment the call connected. "Now, it's barely 6 in the morning. I don't care what time it is, find Amanda." His voice cracked on her name, and Tae-yoon, who had known Min-ho for over a decade, had never once heard him sound like that. Not during the worst of the syndicate wars. Not even when his own father had been shot in front of him years ago. Something had shifted. Something irreversible. Amanda sat in her small apartment, curtains drawn, knees pulled to her chest, trying to convince herself she'd done the right thing. Better to leave first, she told herself, than to be left. Better a wound she chose than one inflicted on her. But the ache in her chest didn't feel like relief. It felt like grief. Her phone buzzed against the coffee table, Min-ho's name lighting the screen again and again. She let it ring out, tears blurring her vision until finally it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the ringing had been. A knock came an hour later, not gentle, not patient. "Urgent, Amanda." His voice, muffled through the door, cracked with something raw. "Please, just tell me you're safe, that's all I need to hear." She opened the door before she'd consciously decided to. Min-ho stood there, disheveled in a way she'd never seen, hair unstyled, shirt wrinkled, eyes red-rimmed with a fear that mirrored her own. "You left," he said, voice hoarse. "I thought," her throat closed around the words. "I thought you'd wake up and regret it, regret me. I'm 34, Min-ho, I'm not some young socialite you can parade around. My own family can't stop reminding me how unremarkable I am. Why would you be any different?" His expression shattered, then hardened with fierce conviction. He stepped forward, cupping her face in both hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me," he said, each word deliberate, unshakable. "I have met countless women who wanted my name, my money, my protection. Not one of them made me feel the way you do simply by existing in a room. You are not unremarkable. You are the only remarkable thing that has ever happened to me." Amanda's tears finally broke free, and Min-ho pulled her against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head as if he could shield her from every cruel word her family had ever spoken. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted into his shirt. "I don't know how to believe someone could choose me, fully, without conditions." "Then let me show you," he murmured against her hair. "Every day for as long as you'll let me." The first time since she was a young girl, Amanda allowed herself to be held without flinching, without waiting for the moment it would be taken away. But even as they stood there, wrapped in fragile new hope, a car idled 2 blocks away, dark windows, patient watchers, men who worked for the same syndicate that had opened fire at Yuri's engagement party weeks ago. They had been watching Min-ho for days. Now they had found something far more valuable than him, his weakness. The following days passed in fragile, tender rediscovery. Min-ho cancelled meetings he'd never once cancelled in a decade of running his empire, choosing instead to sit in the flower shop's back room while Amanda arranged bouquets, content simply to watch her hands work. Her cousins would have called it foolish, a powerful man wasting hours on a florist twice passed over for marriage. Amanda no longer cared what they'd call it. For the first time, she was living a story instead of watching everyone else live theirs. Staring, she said one afternoon, not looking up from the ranunculus in her hands. "I am," Min-ho agreed, unbothered. "You're the most interesting thing I've seen all week. I'm arranging flowers." "Exactly." She threw a stray petal at him. He caught it, tucked it into his breast pocket like something precious, and Amanda's heart squeezed at the absurd tenderness of it. That evening, walking her home, Min-ho grew quiet in a way that made her uneasy. His hand tightened around hers at intersections, his eyes scanning rooftops and parked cars with a vigilance she hadn't noticed before. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just old habits." But later, after he'd left, Amanda watched from her window as two of his men took up posts across the street, not the usual single car, but two, positioned at either end of the block. Her stomach twisted with unease she couldn't name. She didn't know that Min-ho had received word that morning. The syndicate behind the shooting at Yuri's party had identified her, photographed her, traced her routine down to the hour. They knew exactly how to hurt him now, and it wasn't through bullets aimed at his chest. He should have told her. He knew that, even as he chose silence, some old instinct insisting he could handle it quietly, contain the threat before it ever touched her. He'd spent his whole life solving problems with force and secrecy. He didn't yet know how to do it with honesty instead. It was a mistake he would regret bitterly. 3 days later, Amanda closed the flower shop later than usual, exhaustion pulling at her shoulders after a wedding order that had taken all afternoon. She barely noticed the unfamiliar van idling near the corner, barely registered the two men stepping out until rough hands seized her arms and a cloth pressed over her mouth, chemical and suffocating. Her last thought before darkness took her was his name. Min-ho's phone rang at 8 that evening, not Amanda's number but an unknown one. He answered out of instinct, and the voice on the other end was smooth, mocking, unmistakably enemy. "Kang Min-ho. We have something of yours." World went white at the edges. "If you touch her, she's unharmed. For now, consider this a message. Withdraw from the Eastern District contracts, or the woman you've been so carelessly parading around pays for your greed." Line went dead before Min-ho could respond, his hand trembling around the phone hard enough to crack its screen. He had never in his life felt fear like this. Not for himself, never for himself, but for her it was annihilating. "Boss." Tae-yoon's voice was careful, the way one spoke to a man standing at the edge of a cliff. "We'll find her, but you need to think clearly. If you go in without a plan, you could get her killed." Min-ho's hands were braced against his desk, knuckles white, breath coming in controlled, furious pulls. "Then help me think clearly, because right now all I can see is every version of what they might be doing to her." Trace the van's plates to a warehouse near the docks. "It's Choi Byung-chul's territory, the same syndicate from the engagement party." "Then that's where we start." Min-ho straightened, something cold and lethal settling over his features, the mask of the man his enemies feared sliding back into place. "Gather everyone. Tonight we end this." Amanda woke to concrete floors and the metallic smell of an abandoned warehouse, wrists bound to a chair, her head throbbing from whatever they'd used to knock her out. Fear clawed up her throat, but beneath it something steadier took hold. A stubbornness she hadn't known she possessed until this moment. A man entered, older, sharp-suited, studying her like an object rather than a person. "So this is what the great Kang Min-ho has fallen for," he said, circling her chair. "A florist, unremarkable, almost insulting, really." "Careful," Amanda said, voice steadier than she felt. "Insulting me insults his judgment. I imagine that's not a wise thing to do to a man like him." Man's smile flickered, uncertain for the first time. Amanda held his gaze, refusing to let the tremor in her hands show. Hours crawled by in the dark. Amanda thought of her mother, of the family who'd called her unworthy of love, of Min-ho's voice insisting she was remarkable. She held onto that conviction like a lifeline, refusing to let despair take root. Outside, the night had gone silent in the particular way that precedes violence. No birds, no distant traffic, only the held breath of men waiting for orders. Min-ho crouched behind a shipping container, dressed not in his usual tailored suits but dark tactical gear, eyes fixed on the warehouse that held everything he cared about. "On my signal," he murmured to Tae-yoon. "Boss," Tae-yoon said quietly, "you don't have to lead this yourself." Min-ho's jaw tightened. "Yes, I do." The assault came fast and merciless. Min-ho moved through the warehouse's outer guards with brutal efficiency, years of controlled violence unleashed with singular purpose. Gunfire echoed off metal walls. Men who had underestimated him learned quickly why his name inspired fear across the underworld. Inside, Amanda heard the chaos erupting closer and closer, her heart hammering between terror and desperate hope. The man guarding her cursed, drawing his weapon toward the door just as it burst open. Min-ho stood in the threshold, blood on his knuckles, eyes wild with a fury that made even his own men take a half step back. "Min-ho." Amanda's voice broke on his name. His gaze found her instantly, and something in his face cracked open with relief so profound it looked like pain. He crossed the room in 3 strides, gun trained on the guard until the man dropped his weapon and raised his hands. Min-ho didn't spare him another glance. His focus narrowed entirely to Amanda, kneeling before her chair, hands shaking as he worked at the ropes binding her wrists. "I'm here," he said, voice breaking. "I'm here. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I should have protected you better." "You came," Amanda said, tears spilling freely now. "That's all that matters. You came." The moment the ropes fell away, she threw her arms around him, and Min-ho held her like he could weld their bodies together through sheer will, his face buried in her hair, murmuring her name like an apology, a prayer, a vow. Choi Byung-chul emerged from a back office moments later, hands raised in surrender, his earlier confidence entirely gone. "This doesn't have to escalate further, Kang. Take the woman and go. We'll consider the debt settled." Min-ho rose slowly, positioning himself between Amanda and the syndicate leader with lethal calm. "You made the mistake of touching what's mine. There is no version of tonight where that goes unanswered." "Min-ho," Amanda's hand found his arm, grounding him. "I'm safe, that's enough. Don't let him make you something you're not." He turned to look at her, something in his chest unclenching at her voice, at the trust in her eyes even now. Slowly he lowered his weapon, though his men kept Choi and his remaining guards firmly restrained. "Fortunate she's merciful," Min-ho said coldly. "I am not. But tonight I'll let her judgment override mine. Consider your territory forfeit. If I see your men near her again, mercy won't apply." They left the warehouse together, Amanda wrapped in Min-ho's coat, his arm locked protectively around her as his men secured the scene behind them. Neither spoke until they were in the car, the city lights blurring past the windows. "I should have told you about the threat," Min-ho said quietly, staring straight ahead, jaw tight with self-recrimination. "I thought I could handle it without frightening you. Instead, I nearly got you killed through my own arrogance." "You didn't get me killed," Amanda said, reaching for his hand. "You saved me. There's a difference. I should never have let it get that far." "Min-ho," she waited until he turned to look at her. "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be honest with me, that's all." Something in him softened, unraveled, rebuilt itself around her words. By the following week, Choi Byung-chul's syndicate had been quietly dismantled, its territory absorbed, its leadership either imprisoned or fled the country. The threat that had shadowed their relationship from its first violent moment finally, definitively, ended. Amanda returned to her flower shop, though Min-ho's presence there had become a fixture rather than an occasional visit. "Your stalker's still here," Jae-yoon teased, watching him through the window, sleeves rolled up as he attempted badly to help arrange a delivery of tulips. "He's not my stalker," Amanda said, smiling despite herself. She paused, searching for the word, finding it settle into place with unexpected certainty. "He's mine." When Min-ho glanced up and caught her looking, the answering smile on his face held none of the danger the world knew him for, only warmth, only devotion, only her. That evening he took her to the rooftop garden of his penthouse, string lights woven through trellises, the city sprawling gold and glittering beneath them. Amanda sensed something different in the air, in the careful way he'd arranged everything, in the slight tremor in his hands as he pulled a small box from his coat. "Amanda." He knelt before her, and for once the fearsome Kang Min-ho looked entirely undone, vulnerable in a way his enemies would never believe possible. "I have built an empire on control, on certainty, on never allowing myself to want anything I couldn't secure through force. Then you fell into my arms, and I discovered wanting something I couldn't simply take. I could only ask." Amanda's hands flew to her mouth, tears already gathering. "So I'm asking," Min-ho continued, voice steady despite the emotion roughening it. "Marry me. Let me spend every day proving that 34 or 44 or 84, you have never been anything less than the most remarkable thing in my life." Amanda whispered before he'd even fully opened the box, the word tumbling free without hesitation. "Yes, Min-ho." He slid the gold ring onto her finger with hands that shook, then rose to pull her against him, kissing her with a tenderness that held every promise he intended to keep. Behind them, the city lights blurred into gold, indifferent witnesses to a love that had begun in gunfire and found its way, against every odd, to this quiet rooftop moment. "Your cousins will have to find something else to mock you for," Min-ho murmured against her temple, smiling. "Them try," Amanda laughed, breathless with joy. "I have exactly what I want." Wedding took place 3 months later. Small and fiercely private, held in a garden Min-ho had commissioned to be filled entirely with the flowers Amanda loved most. Her cousins attended, quieted for once by the undeniable devotion radiating from the groom's every glance toward his bride. Hana, who had once mocked her for being too old for love, could only watch in stunned silence as Amanda walked down the aisle in ivory silk, radiant, utterly transformed by a happiness, No family cruelty had managed to steal from her. Min-ho watched her approach with tears he made no effort to hide, the feared boss of an empire undone entirely by the woman in white walking toward him. "You look," he said, voice rough as she reached him, "like everything I never knew I was allowed to want." "Then stop wanting," Amanda whispered, smiling through her own tears, "and start having." A year later, Amanda sat in the same rooftop garden, sunlight warm against her skin, one hand resting over the gentle curve of her stomach. Min-ho knelt before her as he had the night he'd proposed, pressing a reverent kiss to the swell where their child grew, his empire's fiercest boss reduced to soft murmurs and unguarded wonder. "She's going to be as stubborn as her mother," he said, smiling up at Amanda. "Or as soft-hearted as her father underneath all that danger," Amanda countered, threading her fingers through his hair. Below them, the city carried on, unaware that within these walls a love story once dismissed as impossible, too late, too old, too unlikely, had bloomed into something eternal. Amanda, once told she was unworthy of love, had found not just a husband but a home, a family, a life fuller than any cousin's cruel whisper could have predicted. And Min-ho, the feared boss who had once ruled through violence and control, had discovered that the greatest power he would ever hold was the gentle, unwavering love of the woman who had fallen into his arms on the worst night of her life, and never left his heart since.